Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Wise Decision Maker. Today we'll discuss a hack for how you can make better decisions in your everyday setting. So better everyday decisions. Disasters in our businesses, in our relationships, in our personal life often result from a series of small mistakes that adding up together can lead to a lot of problems. So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid problems in your everyday decision making. And this technique will help you prevent these problems through investing very little efforts, less than 5 minutes most of the time when you do this technique, to help you make the best decisions in everyday situations. And yes, since I often get asked, you can use this technique for major decisions if you're facing a true emergency, but there's much more effective techniques that are applicable to major critical decisions. So I advise you to not use this technique for major decisions unless it's a super emergency. So, I'll admit it, I have a problem with premature email sending. I tend to be an optimist and risk blind, so I tend not to really focus hard on thinking about how my email can be misread in more hostile ways. I don't tend not to look at it, 3 times over, 5 times over before I hit send. And I don't look at the tone, all that stuff. I just don't look at it. It's not my intuitive nature to do that. I just rather write them quickly. So, I get in trouble because of it. So I've really gotten in trouble because of it, because I don't look through my emails very closely, and I'll tell you a story when I got in trouble. I had a coaching client who ran a mid-size growing technology company, and he wanted to acquire a smaller technology company. And I had some pretty serious concerns about his intentions to acquire this new technology company. It was an opportunity buy, it was a sudden opportunity, just came along, and he was deciding to go for it. Not great from my perspective, so I wrote him an email saying that, hey, this really doesn't seem to align with your company's strategy, and you didn't really seem to have done much due diligence on it. It's very likely that this opportunity buy will destroy value for you rather than create it, as most mergers do. So research shows that over 80% of all mergers and acquisitions, destroy value rather than creating it. You might be surprised by that, but that's what happens. You have to be very careful when you do a merger and acquisition to make sure to do it right. So I wrote my client this email, and he took some offense at my criticism of his intention, his judgment. We soon ended our coaching relationship. So I was looking back at this, obviously, I look at the situation, what did I do wrong, what happened, and I saw that I really screwed up. I really should have phrased the email differently, not being so transparent and direct with my concerns, but really taking my client's interpretation of my tone, of my email into account, and have written it in a much more thoughtful manner. So I really think that I failed as a coach there, because I accidentally inspired a defensive reaction in my client, and that was not a good thing. That's never something I want to do. Either lose a client relationship or inspire an unnecessary defensive reaction. So, what should I have written? I should have started with expressing my excitement at the possibility of him furthering his own goals and furthering his company goals through making this acquisition. So starting with excitement. And then I should have asked him, hey, tell me, how does this acquisition fit into your broader merger and acquisition strategy? And what kind of due diligence did you do on it to make sure that you didn't end up like the other 80%, like the 80% of acquisitions and mergers that end up destroying value? I should have asked him if he ever actually worked with this company, or if he can try out low-level collaboration to make sure that there's a culture fit, because it's really often the case. There are 2 big problems that people don't consider when doing mergers and acquisitions. They look at the externals, they look at the financials, they look at the technology their company possesses, if it has technology. But what they don't look at is internal culture of the company and internal businesses, processes, and systems. So 2 things: internal culture, people, how they interact, and processes and systems. These internals are what most of the time cause destruction of value rather than creation of value. So the And it's especially likely in this sort of opportunity buy, destruction of value rather than creation of value, because you didn't do the due diligence, you didn't really examine it for a long time. You just see an opportunity and you go for it and seize it. So stating my worries is what led to his bad response. Now, why would this new format, as I thought about it later, not have led to this response as I realized it? Well, first of all, because I start the email by expressing excitement for this potential acquisition and saying that, hey, this can, I'm excited about this furthering your goals, your personal goals, your company goals, it would have placed us on the same side, would have placed us on part of the same tribe. It would have reminded him that my primary motivation always is to help him accomplish his goals and to help his company accomplish the company's goals. Then by using curious questioning, I would have asked, hey, what's your company's broader merger and acquisition strategy? Now, I happen to know for a fact that he didn't have a broader merger and acquisition strategy. But by using questioning, I would have not rubbed his face into this problem. I would have posed this as something for him to think about, whether he should have a broader merger and acquisition strategy or not. And so that would have helped him think about this. I would have also asked him about the due diligence of the both externals, which you pretty much do. You look at the financials, you look at the technology, you look at their various material wealth, properties, equity, and so on. Now, I would have also asked him about the internal due diligence. Did he look at the systems and processes? Did he look at the internal culture? Perhaps some collaboration to evaluate internal culture and processes and systems would have been helpful. And that would have caused him to think about all of these things, to evaluate them, talk to me and or others about them, and likely not ended our coaching relationship, but have caused him to avoid this acquisition. Now, I know, because of checking up on this later, that the acquisition unfortunately proved pretty much a bust for my client. They were trying to acqui-hire, which is an acquisition hire. They were trying to both get the technology of the other company and, just as importantly, get the people who created this technology. Unfortunately, they had significant culture clashes between the people of that company, between the internal culture and my client's company, and the large majority of people ended up leaving because it was a bad fit. So they got much less than they bargained for when they acquired that company. It was a really bad buy. Now, such examples of bad decisions in everyday life, like the way I screwed up my email, are very common. They usually don't lead to the really bad result that my email led to, but they sometimes do, of course. More often, it's more like a series of bad decisions and bad interactions that ends up leading to ruin, leading to really serious problems. Maybe I keep sending, or somebody keeps sending emails with the wrong tone, with the wrong strategy. Oh gosh, I just had this happen. I had somebody who kept sending me emails that were really pushy. This person seemed like professional on the face of it, good LinkedIn profile, had some good books published, but then he kept sending emails that were really making too many demands on me, weren't really pushy, just asking, not giving. And eventually I started ignoring him and kind of disconnected from him on LinkedIn because, I just don't want to do that. Why would you work with someone who keeps asking and never giving, right? So that's an example of what you don't want to do. You want to think about how the other person interprets your emails. Now, what about in the office? We talked about emails. What about communication in the office? How often have you seen minor little tensions build up over time and lead to major office drama? Maybe you participated in it. It can be really serious. And that's communication in the office, not simply by email. What about when somebody skipped working, you or someone else, skipped working on important but not urgent tasks in favor of urgent and not really important tasks? We do it all the time, checking emails, going to work meetings, responding to other people, but not working on important and not urgent tasks like long-term projects over time, preparing for a major presentation that's 6 months away or something like that. We often don't do that and don't think about these things. So that's another problem in everyday decision making. Or let's say time management. How often have you seen people be consistently late somewhere, or not turning in their projects on time? It's a result of small everyday decisions that result in really big problems down the road. So added together, they really matter. And when we make the wrong choices repeatedly, consistently, as I did with my premature emails, this is pointing to cognitive bias problems. Cognitive biases are what researchers in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics, like myself, understand and have found recently to be the cause for a lot of little judgment errors that we make on an everyday level, as well as major catastrophic errors that we make in major critical decisions. These errors, cognitive biases, mental blind spots, the formal scientific term for them is cognitive biases if you want to look them up on Wikipedia or somewhere else. And there's going to be a long blog linked with the 30 most cognitive biases to this episode, so you can check them out. These cognitive biases are systemic and predictable errors we make as human beings in business, in relationships, in personal life, in all other areas. And because they're systemic and predictable, like these systemic and predictable small everyday errors, we can avoid them, we can address them, we can solve them. So given that I suffered from these problems, and my clients, my coaching and consulting clients, that's what I do. I do consulting, coaching, speaking, and training. We both suffered from these problems on small everyday level problems. What I decided to do is create a technique, a hack, a strategy that you can use very quickly and very effectively to address the large majority of these small everyday decision-making problems. And you do that by asking yourself 5 critical questions. It's a checklist of five critical questions that you ask yourself before making any sort of small everyday minor decision. First question: what important information did I not yet fully consider? A common danger is looking only for information, for evidence that fits your perspective. So looking for evidence that fits the perspective that, I'm writing an email that actually helps my client, as opposed to looking for evidence that my client might misread the email. Or when you are working on urgent tasks, looking for evidence that maybe these are not really important tasks, but you should be working on other tasks that are important, but are not nearly as urgent. So look for evidence that this confirms your perspective, that goes against it. Because if you can't find evidence that goes against your perspective, you're likely to be heading in the right direction. Another problem with this important information, just what the research shows, is that we tend to not generate nearly enough options in our decisions, whether on an everyday level or in major decisions. So what you want to do is generate at least 5 acceptable options. 5 acceptable options that you think, oh, these are good enough, before you choose one to go with. For example, if you're writing an important email, you want to make 5 drafts, or at least 5 ways of saying things, and think about which ways are the most effective in various segments of the email. Or if you're trying to, communicate with your colleagues about something minor and annoying that they're doing, you want to think about different ways of saying it so that it doesn't end up getting into a blame game, getting into a major conflict. And the other thing you want to do is you want to look only at information that actually is important. It's very easy, unfortunately too easy, to keep gathering information for some people who are analytically minded. Not me. I tend to rush to decisions, and this technique helps me avoid rushing to decisions. But there are some people who are really analytically minded and who tend to gather lots and lots of information, much more information than they need. So you want to look at only important information so that you don't get stuck in what's called analysis paralysis and keep analyzing the information. Ideally, you'd want to decide what information is important before you actually go ahead and try to make the decision. So that's the first question. The second question: what relevant dangerous judgment errors have I not yet addressed? And I told you that there's going to be a blog linked with the 30 most common dangerous judgment errors, and that has a link to the assessment that you can take on the 30 most dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. And so you want to be thinking about these dangerous judgment errors and which ones seem most applicable to the question at hand. Third question, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? Now, if you probably have a mentor of some sort, you probably have a peer who you trust in the company or outside the company. Maybe you have someone from outside your workplace who is not a peer in your work, but who is someone who you trust in your everyday life, spouse or someone like that, a good friend. Or perhaps you have a consultant, a coach, somebody like that who you can turn to give you advice on these topics. So that's one aspect of this question. The other aspect of this question, if you don't have time to consult this person, if it's a rush decision or what you want to do, in this case, is imagine what this person would tell you. Now, interestingly enough, when we imagine what this person who we know, imagine a specific person very clearly, imagine her speaking to you and giving you specific advice, your trusted objective advisor, imagine her telling you, hey, this is what I think you should do, this is what I think you're missing. We get actually most of the benefits of this person themselves. We can't perfectly model this person, of course, but we can do it most of the way. So over 50% of the benefits would come from you very specifically and concretely imagining what this person would actually tell you. Now, the fourth question, we're transitioning with this question from making the decision to implementing the decision. The question is, how have I addressed all the ways that this decision can fail? Now, if you choose the best option, but you fall down on the implementation of the option, maybe you decide on the right tone for your email, but you screw up writing the actual email. Maybe you decide to work on important, not urgent things, but you keep getting distracted by the next shiny object of the urgent thing, despite your intention, despite the choice that you made. There are so many people who do that. I mean, like when somebody comes into your cubicle and says, hey, can you help me with this? And I've helped people who just can't say no to such requests, despite them committing to working on their own important and not urgent projects. And what you need to learn is asking this question. So for example, if you have an office door, you want to keep it closed in that sense, or pre-commit to saying that, hey, I can't help with this because I have this really super important and urgent project. I have a super important project that needs to be done. So something like that. And there are many techniques that you can use. But the critical thing is you want to evaluate all the ways that this can fail and address them in advance. So one thing you might discover while you're working on this is that the option you picked of the 5 acceptable options might not be nearly as good as you thought because it'll fall down on the implementation, So that's something that you want to be ready to recognize, admit yourself honestly, as opposed to going blindly with this option, even if you don't think it'll work very well, which too many people tend to do, and instead go on to choose one of the other 5 acceptable options that you generated earlier on in the process. So, going on to the last question, the final question, the 5th question, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? This is a surprisingly powerful question. Why is this? There are too many leaders I know, again, people who tend to be risk averse and analytical, who are plagued by self-doubt about decisions that they made, who, let's say, send an email and then they immediately think of, this person, how can she misread this email and get mad at me or something like that. So you don't want to be the kind of person who is plagued by that doubt. And that's the one problem that this question will help resolve. The other problem, even more commonly, that this question helps resolve is when teams of people are making small everyday decisions. So let's say you're in your meeting discussing a topic and you have some conflict around it, as naturally there are conflicts around decision making. But you say, okay, this is what we'll do. Unfortunately, what I've often seen happen, which you've probably seen as well, is people who disagreed with the original decision, anytime there's a problem with the choice that was made, they keep bringing it up. They keep hashing over all decisions that were made in small everyday matters and saying, oh, I told you so, we shouldn't have done this is going to be a problem, we should change our minds. So you want to avoid that. And that's how you avoid it, by deciding in advance what kind of information would make you as an individual or as a team revisit this decision. So you can set a financial trigger. for this. For example, if we don't reach 30 million sales for your decision, or a survey trigger, such as if we don't reach 15% increase in customer satisfaction, or a prospect trigger, such as if we don't secure 30 new prospects in the next 3 months. All of those are ways that you can set a trigger to revisit the decision. And if your trigger is not met, then you just go ahead with the decision. So it will help you a lot down the road. That's why you should use this. Now, how my clients and I tend to use this decision aid is to have it in front of us at all times. Have it in front of us at all times. So I made this decision aid into the form of a 4-sided folding business card. So I keep one on my desk at all times, and a lot of my clients do the same thing. So here it is. You see the 5 questions, and you see it's a 4-sided business card size. And here I have an inspirational quote on the back: beware of going with your gut. Our intuitions are adapted for the ancient savannah, not the modern business environment, and often lead to business disasters. So that's another nice reminder. But the crucial thing is these 5 questions. So keeping these on your desk facing you when you're typing out your email, looking at your spreadsheets, making your everyday decisions is critical. So that's what many of my clients do. Another thing that many of my clients do is hang it in the form of a poster on the wall. So, I forgot to say this. Something that my clients do with this is also keep it in their wallet. I have it in my wallet for when I'm away from my computer and I'm making decisions elsewhere, so to remind myself. Another thing you can do with this is hang it on a poster. Print out a poster with these questions and hang it on your wall in your office for all of your employees and so on. And you can, by the way, get this decision aid for all of your employees as well. And there's a link to where you can get the 4-sided folding business cards and the poster in the show notes to the episode. Now, leaders, as I mentioned, often get the decision aid for all of their employees, not only simply for themselves, but for all of their employees, because all of their employees are making these small everyday decisions all the time. When, everything from sending emails to working with clients and deciding, how do you deal with a customer service problem, working with suppliers, so on. They integrate asking these questions into their business systems. As it's a part of their business process, it's a part of their business system. That way, if you integrate this, you can be confident that all of your employees are minimizing the risk of business disasters in their individual and team decision-making processes. You can also hold your employees accountable. You can make sure that they're held accountable for asking these questions. Because if an employee fails to ask one or more of these questions, for example, if they fail to ask, how can this decision have gone wrong, then you can make sure that they are appropriately penalized for not following the process. This is a simple process thing. They're not following the process, they can be penalized, it's under their control. However, if a decision went wrong, that resulted in a serious problem in a way that wasn't under their control, that they could not have realistically predicted. Sudden tariffs hit and they couldn't have predicted these tariffs. Or, there was a tornado and their supplies got delayed or something like that. They can't predict these things. Then you should hold the employee blameless even if a serious problem occurred as a result of their everyday decision making if they couldn't have predicted it and if they actually did ask the questions. So, having a shared approach to decision-making will enable everyone in your company to also be more efficient in their decision-making as a team, in a team activity. So what a lot of leaders do is make sure to ask all of their employees before any meetings, where usually decisions have to be taken place, at least some decisions. They make sure they ask their employees to think about these decisions in advance and answer these 5 questions. And then in the meeting themselves, they of course have the 4-sided business cards in front of all of the employees when they're holding the meeting, and they use the 4-sided business cards with the 5 questions to structure the meeting agenda. It's a natural structure for the meeting agenda. You go for all 5 questions and then you commit to the decision. So that's a very, very effective mechanism that makes your meetings much shorter because you know what questions to ask. knowing what questions to ask is often the most critical and problematic part of making a decision. And knowing these questions, knowing that you're going to be asking these questions, makes things much easier and more efficient down the road. So, additionally, everyone has much more confidence in the decisions that they make because you follow a shared process. It's transparent, it's clear, you know how you evaluate information and how you make the decisions. Now, I don't frequently like to say this, but as I mentioned at the beginning, if you are in a real slam, if it's a real emergency, you can use these 5 questions for making major decisions. So for example, if you have a meeting with a business colleague and the business colleague makes a sudden unexpected proposal to you and says, for some reason, for whatever random reason, it's only available in this period of time, and you can trust that they're not trying to screw you, that it really is available for only a short period of time, then you can take less than 5 minutes to ask these 5 questions. You're going to almost always be in a situation where you can ask the 5 questions. You shouldn't ask the 5 questions if you're about to get hit by a bus. You should just jump out of the way of the bus. But if you are making any sort of business decision, there's almost never a time when you don't have the time to ask yourself these 5 questions. Just ask for a break in the meeting, go out of the room, ask yourself these 5 questions, analyze them, come back. Easy enough. If you think that the break for asking the 5 questions would be problematic, ask to go to the restroom. So you need a bit of time to think about it, whatever. Easy enough. Cool. So I want you to check out the blog on asking these 5 questions. I, of course, went over them. I suggest you read the blog. It has a lot of links to a number of principles, basic principles, behind why these questions work. So the research around these questions, as well as links to other effective decision-making techniques that you can use for more important critical decision-making processes. And I'll also link one of these in the show notes in the episode. I'll also have a link to where you can get the 4-sided business cards as well as a poster. Now, my goal, as always, is to provide you with outstanding value in avoiding decision disasters and making the best and most profitable decisions. I hope I've been successful in this episode, and I want to ask you to share your thoughts on whether I have been successful. Share your thoughts on the episode. Share where and how you might find yourself using these 5 questions technique. Click like if you like this episode. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, to avoid missing content that will help you defeat cognitive biases and make the wisest decisions. You can learn much more about this in my book on this topic and how you avoid cognitive biases and make the wisest decisions, called Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Now, I can also offer you a free resource that will be linked in the show notes. Sign up to my Wise Decision Maker course, which gives you the fundamental basic principles of wise decision making. I hope to see you on the next episode of The Wise Decision Maker, and I wish for you to have the wisest decisions, my friends.